Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. Absolutely loads to talk about today. We've got the Australia-England ODIs, the end of the county championship, and we've got the start of England's test series in Pakistan coming up in less than a week's time. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Katya Witney and Phil Walker. Mark Butcher will be joining us later on in the show. Before we go on, a reminder of the new Patreon offering that is up and running. We've had our first 2 daily episodes already after the last 2 England-Australia ODIs. A reminder what we've got for you. For £5 a month, we'll be giving you the Wisden Bronze package that includes an additional weekly show every week. It'll be slightly different to what we do usually. Subscribers will also have access to the Patreon community function, which is essentially a direct group chat with us in them, which we'll be setting up this week. You will also get daily podcasts after every day of England men's and women's international cricket, hitting your feeds about an hour also after the final ball is bowled. Then on the Wisden Silver package for £7.50 a month, you get everything in the Bronze package, plus free access to the digital version of Wisden Cricket Monthly, a discounted subscription to the print version, and 50% off any Fairfield Books title, the publishers that brought you Lara, The England Chronicles, or Being Geoffrey Boycott. And if you really want to show your dedication to all things Wisden, you can get the Wisden Gold subscription for £11.50 a month to get as close to the team as possible. This gives you access to everything in the first 2 packages, plus each month a virtual live event with some of the podcast team. These will be Q&As, quizzes with prizes, panel discussions, things of that nature.
Any take up? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been pretty good. We've got some really positive responses to the first 2 dailies. So yeah, really good start. But yeah, just a reminder to give people a flavour of how much we're giving them. In October alone, there are 24 extra podcasts. So it all starts for £5.
You better get that rota sorted out. Sharpish.
It's going to be a busy month. Anyway, moving on. We had 2 very fun ODIs to end the series. England scored at 8 and then blew Australia away in a rain-affected game at Lords, and then they threatened to do the same at Bristol. They were 202 for 3 at the halfway point before dramatically collapsing to part-time spin for the second time in the series. Katya, Australia were not far off full strength. England had an extremely inexperienced side. How do you reflect on a 3-2 Australia win with England pushing the world champions?
Yeah, I actually think it's a tough one to judge because you can still see all of the vulnerabilities there that we talked about from the first 2 matches, but you also saw a side that was capable of winning. I think the positives, obviously you've got to have Brook as a positive, having come in with limited ODI experience, not usually getting a long run at these kinds of series, and he's come in and he's done everything that was expected of him, albeit with those first 2 results as well. Also, it's a tough ask coming in 2 years into your career, leading an England side against the world champions when they've been in freefall for over a year now. And he came in and, bar those first 2 ODIs, did a good job. I mean, you can't turn around and say 2 wins and everything's fixed, because clearly it's not. Those frailties are still there. We still don't really know what England's best ODI 11 looks like. This is a side that's still pretty cobbled together. And it's not really a side that you'd want to be taking into a major tournament yet. They're vastly inexperienced. You know, you've still got the problem of the opener. Phil Salt really didn't have a good series. But yeah, it is encouraging that there does seem to be something there to work with after quite a bleak, depressing year in the white ball format.
Yeah, I thought even though they lost the series, I think I always tried to be careful in not just being like, if a side wins, they've done well, and if they've lost, they've done badly. But for the first time in a long time, and something I don't think we've seen under Butler in ODI cricket, it looks like they're trying to do something coherent. So using Salt as an example, obviously, if you average 19 in a series, you haven't done that well. But for the first time in maybe a couple of years, having a guy go really hard at the top, you could sort of see a coherence with Duckett taking a bit longer to get in, and that really suited Duckett. Brook had an amazing series at 4. Just a couple of stats for you. Ben Duckett scored the most runs ever scored by an England opener in a men's ODI series against Australia. And I think he's just got the right tempo for opening the batting in ODIs. And then here's another one. Harry Brook, with 312 runs in the series, broke the record for the most runs scored by a captain in a bilateral ODI series against Australia, breaking Virat Kohli's record in early 2019, where he pretty much scored 100 every time he batted. Brook, 312 runs at 78, strike rate of 128. Do you reckon he should be given the ODI captaincy on a full-time basis?
You do, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Go on.
I'll ask you the question. I've said a lot already, so you want to go first, and then I can respond.
I think
to
if they're
that.
3 years out from the next World Cup, I think there's definite logic to it. He looked at ease in himself. I think he made some interesting and good moves. Actually, I liked the intensity in the field that you saw, the way that he rotated the seamers as well. It wasn't one size fitting all for each game. I think tactically he's very astute. I think that he's always had that. That's what people say about him in the game. So I think there's some logic to it. Butler's currently doing both jobs. Perhaps it may be an interesting conversation for McCullum to have with him to suggest that he streamlines just into the T20 side. Obviously, he remains a key figure in the ODI side. There's an argument for that. It's certainly the longer term view. And there was that sense watching it, I suppose, that this was beginning to become his team, and that there is a sense of renewal to it. That the Butler era is now, in terms of personnel, it's thinning out. But if Butler is desperate still to do it, and if he can make that case and it can really come from within, then on reflection, I would keep Butler in the job for now, because I think he is so essential, Jos Buttler, to the whole story of English white ball cricket, that I wouldn't want to ostracize him, even unwittingly. I wouldn't want him to feel like he is yesterday's man. Now, for what it's worth, not that I know him very well at all, but my instinct is that he would be very open to having this conversation anyway, and I don't think he would take it to heart. Other players would. I don't necessarily think that he would, but you don't know, and it is quite precarious, I think. Butler has overseen 2 very difficult world title campaigns as captain and looked quite done in by them by the end of it, but was very clear in his statements after the T20 World Cup that he was utterly determined to carry on. And we all speculated at the time that perhaps he will have run his race as skipper, and he made quite clear that he hadn't. So I think he has earned the right to have to make that decision, really. But I can understand if they may gently be leaning towards him considering removing one captaincy cap and keeping on the other. I can see there's some logic. I like what Brook did as a figurehead, and if part of the challenge is to separate, or no, not even separate, but perhaps coordinate is a better way of putting it, the job of leader and figurehead with the job of scoring runs or taking wickets, then he's shown that that's just another day for Harry Brook, for whom pressure is a word he needn't ever utter yet or spell, because he couldn't give a toss.
Pressure's for ties, isn't it?
He is a remarkable cricketer. That 87 he made at Lord's is one of the best ODI innings I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think I come at it from 2 angles. I think one, the worry for a new skipper is, are they going to be burdened by it? And if anything, Brook looked empowered by it. And I don't think that's something that we've ever really said about Butler. Brook had to deal with quite a delicate situation with the criticism around his comments after the first ODI. Took it in his stride, clearly didn't faze him at all. And then on the other side is, well, in 50 over cricket, you're building towards the next World Cup. England at the very beginning of their cycle. Butler's going to be 37 at that World Cup. That's a big commitment for a guy for whom captaincy hasn't always looked that natural. And you talk about Butler's importance to English white ball cricket. That is first and foremost as a batter. Jos Buttler averaged 15 at the 2023 World Cup. He was massively out of sorts as a batter. And I think that is what he can offer most to English white ball cricket. And I think you can look at it quite pragmatically. Just look, there's a T20 World Cup again in 14 months' time or something like that. You can totally separate the 2 formats and go like, Jos, keep doing that. But, the Test side and the ODI side, I think, will look closer and closer alike over the next few months under Brendan McCullum, especially from the start of the Champions Trophy, when the schedule becomes slightly more manageable for all format cricketers. So I think there's a pretty pragmatic case to just say, well, as you said as well, you made a comparison with Vaughan and Hussain in 2003 in terms of this group of players have made some positive strides. Under Brook, it feels almost like a backward step to go to Buttler.
Yeah, that was a few days ago, though, wasn't it? Yeah, look, the parallels are there. But I've also said about Buttler in the past that he constantly seems to be the right person at the wrong time. And I want to see how he dovetails with Brendan McCullum as coach. And I think he's earned the right to have a year or so to see how that relationship plays out. I know what you're saying, that he's 37 by the time of the World Cup, but he's also fit as a fiddle and may well be still one of the best white ball players in the world in 3 years.
I'm sure he will be.
So look, so much of it for me stems from what he really desires and wants. I don't think it is some kind of sort of unfathomable rocket science captaining in 50 over cricket. The question really with him is, does it get him down and does it shave some of the edges off him as a player? And we've seen evidence to suggest that it does, as you've referenced, and we've seen evidence to suggest that it doesn't, because he's also been a key man as a leader and done very well. Going all the way back to his first series, which again is perhaps another parallel with Brook. You know, he stood in as skipper against Australia, whatever it would have been 4 or 5 years ago now, beat them 5-0, and he was untouchable as a skipper, and then it became his team. So look, there is absolutely a case to be made, but I think he is so still integral that I just want to tread a bit carefully.
Yeah. Katya, how do you see it?
I think we've got to be quite careful with actually looking at the job that Buttler was asked to do compared to what someone like Owen Morgan was able to do. It was always going to be impossible to follow Morgan, not just because Morgan won the 50 over World Cup, but because of how Morgan won that. He was given the best group of players and told, we will give you everything you want, go and win that 50 over World Cup. That's not what Jos Buttler was given. Jos Buttler has always had to make do with what he's got. He's always had to rotate these players and not have the best players available to him until the tournaments, and he's not been able to have that consistent run at it. And he's still 1 win out of 3 World Cups, which most captains are normally no wins out of 3 World Cups. So there is still that element to it. I think it's a very unfortunate time to have an injury right when you're in the start of this regeneration period, when you want to stamp your mark on that side and make it your own, and that's allowed Brook to come in, and now we're having that conversation. If Buttler's calf hadn't been...
that's a really good point. I think that's a very, very good point. Would it have been so dramatically different if he had been fit? And in fact, if they had nicked it 3-2, and you see a couple of these players coming through and showing what they did show, Duckett making runs, Brook being brilliant, which is inevitable anyway, then does it start to look like his renewal, his second coming or third coming as a skipper?
Exactly. Brook's come in and nicked it pretty much. I agree with what you've both said though. Like when you look at Buttler on the field, he looks like a chronic overthinker, whereas Brook almost looks like the reverse, and that's probably the quality you want in a leader rather than someone like Buttler who's burdened with overthinking. And Brook is brilliant. Like, Brook is a natural born leader, but he's only 25. Like, there's so much time. There's so much time for him to come and take this ODI and take on whatever captains he wants. There's so much time for him to do whatever he wants. Let him score runs for a bit. You know, before this series, he hadn't really done anything in ODI cricket, really.
Yeah, but equally, he hadn't played that much.
Exactly.
And I think it was no surprise that Brook could do this against the best team in the world. And the thing I find, I see what you're saying about there's loads of time for Brook, there's no rush to it. But if you don't give Brook the captaincy ahead of this, in this World Cup cycle, that means he wouldn't get the opportunity to captain at a World Cup until he's 33.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but it doesn't, not giving Brook the captaincy now doesn't necessarily mean he won't be the captain by the time the 50 over World Cup comes along.
It's not now or never for 3 years.
He's only been an England cricketer for 2 years. You know, give him a little bit more time. It doesn't have to be a load more time. If he doesn't, if Buttler sees England through to the next World Cup, then he's clearly earned the right to do so. You know, he's earned the right not just through what he's done in the past, but over what he will do in the next 3 years. Yeah. Whoever is captain, it probably will be one of Buttler or Brook who captains at that ODI World Cup, and whoever does, regardless of what the result is, will have earned the right to do that. As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I guess this conversation will be kicked down the road a little bit. England goes to the Caribbean in November. Brook won't be on that tour because of the 2 test tours around it. So Buttler will fitness dependent, captain England again in ODI cricket, and he'll show what he can do with this group of players.
Of which there's lots of reasons to be cheerful, by the way. Sure, they lost the series. They didn't look to be particularly at the races in the first 2 games, but there were individual statements of intent that, put this team in a pretty good position, I think, going forward over the next couple of years. They've found the very good, unorthodox left-handed opener who will score runs against lots of different teams in lots of different conditions. Brook's a world-class star, a freakish talent. Livingston has had a good couple of weeks. He's had a really good couple of weeks, and while you're never gonna hang your hat on him ever, perhaps there is still hope for him as an international cricketer with a slightly different role. The way that they've managed Archer, they deserve credit for. And look, at Lord's, he looks ripped, by the way. At Lord's, he was bowling fast, searingly quick.
The ball he hit Labuschagne first ball.
The ball he hit Labuschagne.
2019.
He cleaned up. I think it was it Mitch Marsh that he cleaned up? I think it was Mitch Marsh. Anyway, he cleaned up one of the top 3 or 4, and then the emergence of Cars as well, who's a very dynamic cricketer, can get good players out, bowl an absolute perler against Labuschagne to get him out in that game. That performance, it is a high wire act with this team, but when it works and they don't fall over, then it's jaw-dropping, and that's what you saw at Lord's. That's their template. That is their model.
And I liked how attacking Brook was at Lord's. They only used 4 bowlers in that game. Australia got off to a flying start, and they take 2 quick wickets, and it would have been a temptation at that point to give a few overs to your spinners, get through them. But Brook was like, no, we're going to win the game now, and that is exactly what they did.
I think you also want to be slightly wary. I don't think that having the ODI captaincy on a permanent basis would affect Brook's mental state whatsoever. I think it would be very naturally suited to it. But I think you do want to be careful with running the risk of burning him out. Brook is such an integral part of that test side. Like, less than 2 weeks after the final ODI, he's going to be out in Pakistan. And, he's got all these franchise opportunities available to him as well. He's part of the T20 squad. If you say, we want you in every single test series and we want you in every single ODI series as captain, that's quite a risk to take with a 25-year-old who you think is a natural born leader and who you think has got all this confidence and everything. Do you really want to put that to the stress point this early? I think would be
Could I just, sorry, on Brook, could I just briefly dwell on those 2 innings? The unbeaten 100
doesn't have to be brief. There were some of the best hitting, middle order ODI hitting you'll see.
Yeah,
genuinely that good.
But I thought they were more than that, because you can see that with with decent players and decent hitters, they can have days out. But the 87 that came off the back of the unbeaten 100, the 87 at Lord's, when it had been raining, when Australia won the toss and inserted England, and everyone said a good toss to win, and England went off okay, but they were 70 for 2.
Going at 5s.
Yeah. And he came out and he was defensively immaculate against Hazelwood in particular, and he plays it so late and he stays side on. He has that trigger going back and across. He drops it at his feet like prime Joe Root to get himself going. And then when it's in his arc, he's going to unfurl and play his shots. But it was so technically watertight. And it reminded me of something that his old coach, Martin Spate, who coached him at Sedbergh School when he got the scholarship to go up to the posh school, and it was his finishing school in effect. Martin Spate, former Durham and Sussex player, he was his coach. And I interviewed him about Brook a couple of years ago, and he said he's obsessed with technique. And he studies it really, the minutiae of technique, he studies it, and he's obsessed particularly with his defence. And I interviewed Brook 2 years ago, and he spoke only about his defence. And when I interviewed him the other day, he spoke again about his alignment, where his head is, how he plays defensively. And I think this is probably, it was in evidence at Lord's, and I think it's worth remembering that when we have this idea of him as this kind of, untrammeled genius for whom it all comes wildly easy, and he doesn't think about it, and he doesn't say much. He doesn't really give a toss. Well, if he does, it's all folded into his gifts. there's a lot more at play with him. And just because he doesn't articulate it fulsomely and effusively in his press conferences and shit like that, doesn't mean to say that he's not a very, very astute and deep thinker about the game and his own game as well. And what I saw at Lord's was sure a player whose confidence was high. And so he felt at ease in himself and he wasn't trying to force any issues. But I thought the way that he went about that innings was absolutely technically brilliant. And it spoke not only of a clear mind, but a sophistication of technique that I don't think he gets enough credit for. People sort of say, oh, well, one of the reasons why he's so good is because it's so simple. But it's only simple because he's worked so damn hard at making it so. Like when you see Root play so well and you think, well, it's because he's spent days, weeks, months analysing it, playing it out in his head, discussing it with people who know to get to that point of sort of ultra developed technical acuity, and that's what Brook has.
There's really good innings management in both games. Even at Bristol, when he gets 72 or 53, he's 9 off 20. You know, he properly plays himself in.
Yeah.
And he's got confidence in his own tempo. He knows. He's so confident now. I think that he just thinks, well, I can give periods to the bowlers in a way that he's potentially been guilty of not doing that enough.
No, he has, and we've spoken about him a lot in recent weeks. You know, because it's been the theme of his summer. All I would say now, he's come into his prime in the last week and a half, 2 weeks of what's been a sort of cameo-inflected, slightly underwhelming summer for him personally. He's going to break records for the next few months away from home. You know, Pakistan, New Zealand, he's going to make obscene amounts of runs across those 6 test matches. And I think now we see the next stage of the Brook phenomenon.
Absolutely. Very quickly, what do you reckon England's first choice team for the Champions Trophy will be? Because in theory, England have Root, Stokes and Butler available again.
I don't know. I was particularly looking at the middle order and thinking if you've got Root and Stokes back in and you obviously have Brook and Smith, how do you've almost got like a 4-3 situation, and it will probably be Smith that is ruled out. I think Smith could bat at 3. If Root's not if Root's not available, if Root doesn't go to the Champions Trophy, I would expect to see them put Smith up to 3. So you could have a situation where whichever one of Smith of Root or Stokes doesn't play, then Smith fills their kind of position in the batting order. If they both play, then it would be a middle order of Root, Brook and Stokes. I don't know if Root will come back to it. We've already heard from Stokes that he kind of does want to come back to it, or if asked, he would come back to it.
I think he will be asked.
There you go.
and Root, I'd be very surprised if he said he's not up for it. I'd be personally shocked. Do you think there's a chance that he'll demur?
I think potentially. Potentially. I don't know. I think that he's played so little 50 over cricket apart from that World Cup. I can see a situation where he goes, you know, I'm still one of England's greatest ever ODI players. I'm in my mid-30s now. I'm kind of done with that. You know, I've done New Zealand this winter. I've done Pakistan this winter. We're going to do India. It's going to be a long year. I'm going to make my money in the IPL that he now has to enter this year. And I'm going to do that. I can see that happening. I think he probably will be available. But I can see a situation where he's not.
Yeah, I think your point on Smith's quite interesting, because I think Smith had the sort of series that Brook had when he first started playing ODI cricket, where you can totally see how it will work, but he's just played so little of it, it's not quite worked yet. I've just jotted down a team. One of Jackson, Salt up top. I think there's only space for one of them. Duckett, obviously. Root, Brook, Stokes, Butler, Livingston as your top 7. And then bowlers, probably as we were in this series, Cast, Archer, Rashid and Potts. The interesting one with Smith is I think he could basically bat anywhere if given time. And I'd be tempted, if Root does come back, to let him open.
I would too. So if you're saying across 20 games...
Who's getting more runs?
Salt, Jax. And Jax had a really good series, by the way, and looked technically sound. I thought the 80-odd he made at Durham was really good. Came in early, played really nicely. There's definitely something to work with there. But who's the better batter, him or Jamie Smith? Jamie Smith. Who's the better batter, Phil Salt or Jamie Smith? Well, there's daylight between those two, and then it's Jamie Smith. It will be a new role for him, sure. but it's a role that he could pick up, I think, quite quickly. And I think it's hard to leave out. While I read you, I understand your team, and Jack's probably is a bit ahead of him in terms of the pecking order. But as we saw with the Test team, how do you leave a player of that kind of quality out? That kind of boundary hitting brilliance aligned to being technically sound when needs be, right? Sometimes you have to just give that first 10 overs over to whoever it is.
Yeah, I agree. I was almost going more what I think they will do rather than what I think they should do. I think I would open with Smith.
Oh, right.
I think just in terms of you just want your best players there. It's not that dissimilar to Bairstow in the late 2010s, right? Where he was clearly good enough to get in the team, but the only spot was opening, and he hadn't really
The
done much of
2017
it.
series against the West Indies.
Yeah.
Penny for Butler as Butler's Indian summer as an England 50 over opener.
I actually had Butler down as an opener
Did
in my
you?
side. I
Interesting.
did. Yeah.
Interesting. And then so Butler opening, and then that's how you create the gap.
You free up that middle order. You want those players in there, and I think Butler's the one who's potentially the most suited to opening. I think Smith could open, but I think at the minute I'd rather have Butler opening than Smith.
Yeah, I can see both ways. I'd love to see it.
I also think the reason that Butler is in that middle order or lower middle order is because he's such a great finisher, and England didn't have a player who could finish in the way Butler did. I think now in that middle order they do have players who can provide that finisher role that Butler doesn't need to be in that middle order as much anymore.
Yeah, there's loads of options.
Yeah, it's exciting, right? 50 over cricket with England hasn't been very exciting for a couple of years.
No, that's true, and it's funny because there was a lot of shade thrown at this series late summer. What's riding on it? Blah blah blah. But cricket always does its thing in the end, and it became quite an interesting story, I think.
50 over cricket is quite good.
Well, but the caveat is the England's best performance was in a 39 over game, right? England at 40 over cricket.
I'm glad you brought this up.
England at 40 over cricket would be unplayable, but 50 over is just a little bit long for their lunacy.
But I also thought, well, have we actually accidentally stumbled upon what is maybe the most watchable day out?
40 over cricket.
Because it's not too long. 100 overs is a long day out.
Listen, 40 over cricket is the best format of cricket. Apart from Test cricket, 40 over cricket is the best format of cricket in any level. Club cricket on a Saturday, 35, 40 over cricket is good. Anything more than that is unnecessary. In ODI cricket, 50 overs is too long. It's 100 overs in a day plus a break in the middle. Do me a favour.
Was it Lords? He had a 20 break as well. So you just had 80 overs
It
cricket.
was so long. Like it was the Durham game. I was meant to go out for dinner with my friends, and I had to cancel my dinner because it was so long.
Yeah. I do hope you're not in this job in 20 years, Katya, like me.
Well, next up, a man who's been in this job for more than 20 years, Mark Butcher, on how England batters can improve against spin and on the absences of Ollie Robinson and Liam Dawson in Pakistan. Two of England's ODI defeats to Australia. If you're looking at where the game went wrong for England, it was the introduction of part-time spin, really. And a lot of people who didn't watch the game thought that England maybe went too hard against the part-time spinners. But in the fifth ODI in particular, Bethel, Smith, Livingston, they didn't get out trying to hit the ball out of the park. It was more just trying to knock it for a single. Do you think milking spin in the middle overs is actually an underappreciated skill? It's actually much harder than it looks, because in the glory days of bilateral ODIs, when you had 5-match series all the time, people used to complain about the middle overs where you used to see a lot of that. But actually, is that a harder skill than people perhaps give it credit for?
Well, it is. I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying last week in terms of the format, because you have so much longer to bat and to accumulate runs whilst still taking on your boundary options. If you want to keep the scoreboard moving, then then knocking singles, hitting gaps for twos, generating a scoring rate at lower risk is very much part of the skill. And if you think about the best to have ever done it, I suppose you could very easily argue is Virat Kohli. That's something that he does brilliantly. It's something that Joe Root was also excellent at. And that style of batting kind of knits together the blistering hitters of the, in the power plays at the top and the bottom of the innings. So yeah, I mean, it's a very underappreciated skill. It's not sexy in any way, shape, or form, but it's the stuff around which big totals are built. And part-time spinners, by their very nature, because they're not trying to take wickets as such, they're not bowling to bowl magic balls or anything like that. They tend to just keep the stumps in play, don't spin the ball a massive amount, and they ask you to do the work, either in terms of hitting big shots or knocking the ball past tight infields. And if that is a skill that you're not used to doing because you play, mainly 20 over cricket where there are no middle over periods of doing that sort of stuff, it can be a little bit discombobulating, and that certainly looked to be the case for England's batting lineup in the two games that they lost three, didn't they? But in the two losses where Travis Head kind of ran amok, that was the issue. I suppose what they would say, what England would say, is, well, we should have just slogged him out the park and made him go at tens, which may well have been the right way to do it. I don't know, but certainly there is more to making the big scores of 350 or consistently making scores of 320 plus than just hitting boundaries the whole time. And so yes, it's a deficit for sure.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's pretty much what they did to Adam Zampa. I think Zampa went for 44 runs in his first 3 overs at Bristol, having gone at 8s in the previous game. Just from a technical point of view, what is it that Root or Kohli does that puts him in such a good position to just knock the ball around? Because, if I go back to those 3 dismissals at Bristol, all of them were sort of stuck at the crease, sort of neither playing forward, neither playing back.
Yeah, I mean, it's that sort of, it's picking length. It's also, I think, if you watch those guys play, they give away their stumps a lot. In terms of moving in the crease. It's not just sort of going deep. It's going deep and outside leg stump. It's allowing yourself to be able to play with a straight bat to square angles, which it's not as madly technical as it sounds. But the more room you give yourself by giving away your stumps, either outside off or outside leg, the more you can play with a straight bat, thus minimizing risk and hit the ball into gaps. Obviously, the fields are set for a static player playing with a straight bat. But if you move your body in an angle, in enough of an angle in terms of depth and in terms of showing your stumps, then all of a sudden you're creating width. And in creating width, you can hit the ball with a straight bat in the gap between extra cover and point, or you can hit the ball with a straight bat between mid-on and mid-wicket, or to the left of mid-wicket if you're a right-hander out towards the sweepers. And in so doing, then you're messing around with the bowler's length. Then you're more likely to get the bad ball as well, as they try to pin you down. And it is that sort of, it's basically just body angles, picking length, which a lot of our guys do very, very well, mixing up the odd sweep, which they're all, they'll go to that option perhaps more than say somebody like a Virat Kohli might. But if you're able to tick over, if every just decent delivery is able to be knocked for one with low risk, then it creates wider scope to score bigger shots when the bad balls come along. And then that in essence is it. And it's very, very difficult to do. That's why there's only a few players who kind of, guys who you wouldn't class as being sort of like your big power hitters. But guys who, Kohli regularly has a strike rate in the 90s. Root was sort of like a little bit lower than that in strike rate terms. But in the times when England were building big innings around him, he'd be up around 80 odd. The other guys would be above 100, and bingo, you have it. And it's a case of just being able to keep that scoreboard moving without taking the risk of suddenly losing 3 or 4 wickets by having to go hard for big shots for a 15 to 20 over period in the middle, which is very high risk.
The test series against Pakistan begins in 6 days' time. The first 2 tests are at Multan. The final test is at Rawalpindi. Even though England only went there 2 years ago, it could be a very different tour to 2022, given the personnel differences and also in terms of the noises Pakistan are making about the different types of pitches they want to see. From a personnel point of view, back in 2022, England packed their squad with spin bowling all-rounders. There's not much of that this time round. How do you see them lining up in the first test especially considering that Ben Stokes might be fit to bat but not bowl. So they might, Joe Root aside, not have any all-round options.
Yeah, well, we've been here before, haven't we? In that as so often is the case, England's teams, particularly away from home, hinge very much around Stokes' ability to play as an all-rounder. If he can't bowl, then England will be pretty much, well. There are two options really. One is that you leave out one of the top order batters, and everybody shuffles up one. You would imagine that Crawley and Duckett would be back together again at the top of the order, and so the only vulnerable spot really in that lineup would be Ollie Pope at 3, with Joe Root going up to bat there, Harry Brook at 4, Stokes at 5, and Jamie Smith at 6. He can bat 6, no problem. I don't think there's any issue with that. I don't think that England will be very keen to go down that route, which then leaves you with just the four specialist bowlers at the back end. Which would likely be Atkinson, Stone, Potts, and Bashir. Of course, if Stokes can bowl, then suddenly you have the option to play either 4 quicks and Bashir, or you can play 3 and 2. But all of this hinges very much on the captain and his fitness. If he can play a full part, then England will have a very balanced team. If he can't, then you're juggling, as we have done before when Ben has been unable to play as an all-rounder, which kind of means that guys like Cox, who's in the squad, is very much unlikely to get a game. Rayan Ahmed unlikely to get a game. Jack Leach might not even play. The pitches in Multan tend to be a little bit on the grippy and slower side. So no matter that they might want extra pace in the surfaces, Multan is not exactly the place to be doing that. And they actually left grass on the pitch in Pindi in the Bangladesh series, and that turned out, yes, it went through a little bit to begin with, but it just ended up being flatter and not spinning either. So I don't think they're going to be able to do anything pitch wise to change what is likely to be relatively good batting surfaces, and teams having to wheedle out wickets. How England go about that, what your sort of favoured 11 might be, and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, Chris Wokes again is he's out there on the tour. It was only a little while ago, 18 months ago or so, that it looked unlikely that he would ever play an overseas series again. If Stokes is unable to bowl, then it's probably unlikely that he plays. But all of this hinges on the captain.
I wanted to ask you about 2 players who are not in Pakistan. James Anderson has been retired. Mark Wood is injured. But the other seamer who was there last time is very much fit and available in Ollie Robinson. Anderson and Robinson were outstanding in 22. Both of them went at about 2 runs and over, average under 20 with the ball, gave nothing away, expertly controlled the reverse swinging ball. Stokes used them really well. Robinson is very much on the outside now. They have picked a lot of seamers since Robinson last played a test match for England. He's doing well for Sussex. He's led the attack that's just been promoted up to Division 1. England have clearly moved on from Robinson. What do you make of that call? Because this is a guy who, at the end of the day, does average 22 with the ball in Test cricket and was ranked 4th in the world last year at one point.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any denying that his skill as a bowler. And I'm pretty sure that is not the reason why he's on the outside at the moment. I think there's been a breakdown in trust between him and the management. I think from what I've heard and from what I think I know, the covenant of trust between those guys and the player has broken down almost irretrievably. And the management would lay the blame at his door firmly. He might have an answer to that, or a riposte to that, but that, I think, is basically it, because there are no denying the numbers, there are no denying the skill that he has. But unfortunately, that I think the England players are given quite a lot of leeway in terms of the trust that they are given by management, and I think he's broken that once too many for McCullum and Stokes, and therefore finds himself on the outer.
The other person I was going to ask you about is someone we spoke about quite a lot last year, but no one's talking about him at the moment. Liam Dawson. He averaged 55 with the bat and 25 with the ball in the championship this year, having done basically the same last year. He's very good at bowling. He's also very good at batting, and England don't have many spin bowling all-rounders for a tour that they wanted loads of spin bowling all-rounders for not 2 years ago.
Yeah.
When he didn't go to India, there were a lot of mitigating factors at play. Chiefly, he had an extremely lucrative SA20 deal that was worth a lot more than he would have earned on the India tour. England seemed to be going towards Tom Hartley for their first choice 11, so there seemed to be a bit of pragmatism to it. That, you know, Liam Dawson at his stage of his career, when he's able to earn a lot of money playing franchise cricket, will he want to carry drinks? I'm not sure. It's very different this time round in that there isn't this tour that's clashing with it.
Well, I mean, look, you probably people control back through the pods over the last couple of years, and you know, I'm very much a fan and in favour of Liam Dawson. But I also saw a scenario whereby, you know, you make the decision based around the contract that you might have had not to go and tour for England, and then a year later you find yourself in a position where you might. Where people want you to go and you've had a brilliant summer all over again and they've moved on. Well, you know, those are the decisions you make. If you make decisions based on contracts and on your earning capability, you know. But also, I think it has been a mistake for England to have overlooked him for a long period of time. But that ship has now sailed. You know, after the India trip, I mean, his words were, you know, I'm too long in the tooth. I've been doing this for too long to be carrying drinks. I'm pretty much done with it. And unfortunately, that's not difficult to row back from something like that. But again, there's no doubting, a little bit like Robinson, there's no doubting his quality. There's no doubting that in conditions whereby you're going to need a bit of extra depth to the batting, you're going to need some nous and some skill as a spin bowler, then he's more than qualified. He's overqualified. But you know, you pays your money, you makes your choice, or you takes your money and you make your choice, and that's where we are. Do I have some sympathy? Yeah, of course I do, absolutely. But the game changes. You make sort of finite decisions based around what certain circumstances might be on one trip, and then 12 months down the line, you find yourself in a position where that isn't the case at all. And actually, you know what? I wouldn't have minded being involved.
Yeah, I think with both decisions, it feels like the way the England squad is constructed is just different to how it might have been 10 or 15 years ago, in that it's it's more like a football club, right? In terms of, this is our lot. This is our group, and you're sort of in the group or you're not in the group. And we make changes, sometimes quite big changes like they did at the start of the 2024 summer. But they're trying to make it as stable a group as possible. Like, for example, you know, you went through why Robinson might not be involved at the moment. And Liam Dawson, the circumstances are actually really quite different to what it was earlier this year when he was.
They are, but I think that's the point. I think the point is that there are, because, and this goes for all players, not just, I'm not singling out Liam Dawson, but the situation is across world cricket that there are always going to be, you know, other goodies to kind of like to turn your head and turn your eye, and there's a commitment sort of being asked here, and that sometimes the circumstances might be beneficial to you and sometimes they might be less so. But the decision you make in terms of which way you go at any particular time then might come back and bite you in the backside at a later date. And it's particularly stark or particularly sharp for those people who are not sort of embedded in it in the first place. If you're kind of on the periphery and you're asked to make a call at a certain point, if your call goes away from the England side, then they might not be quite so happy to ask you the next time. And it's tough, but I'm kind of trying to think of a scenario whereby, you know, not think of a scenario, but the scenario is that there are choices to be made for cricketers that were never there before. And it's the only power really that sort of, I suppose, that international teams have is by saying, okay, there is a kudos. You're pretty well paid. There is a sort of like a commitment required to sort of wanting to be part of this setup, as opposed to having your head turned by every other one. There's your choice. What are you going to do? And at some point, that responsibility then goes back to the player making the decision. I'm not saying that is the scenario with Liam Dawson, but I think the ship sailed. We've had this conversation 100 times over the last 3 or 4 years about this particular player, and well, all the while that Jack Leach was being given game after game, series after series after series. In my mind, Liam Dawson was already, should have been playing in that side, but that wasn't the case back then. But that scenario has long gone. And so his numbers will be there to kind of to mock any selectors from now until eternity. But there is also a sort of like not a contractual, because that's the wrong word, but there is a commitment there being asked for, and sometimes the players can uphold it, and sometimes they can't. And when they can't, they can't be too upset when things don't come back to them down the line.
Well, as I said, the first test match starts in just 6 days' time. So Butch will chat after the first test match. Cheers for your time and catch you then.
We shall.
You can discover the Rado Captain Cook high-tech ceramic Rado England Cricket Limited Edition watch, a Swiss watchmaking technology masterpiece limited to 150 pieces that celebrates the collaboration of Swiss watch brand Rado and England Cricket. Don't miss your chance to own this exceptional and unique timepiece. Visit the link in the description now to secure yours or explore Rado's authorized retailers. So we have 3 back-to-back tests in Pakistan, 2 in Multan and then the 3rd in Rawalpindi. Unlikely to be exactly the same pitches we saw in Pakistan and in particular Rawalpindi in 2022. Katya, how do you think England will line up in the bowling department? Because obviously no Wood, no Anderson, no Robinson, who all did brilliantly in 2022. No Will Jacks, who took a 6 in the first game there as well.
Are we assuming Stokes can bowl or can't bowl?
Let's play it both ways.
Well, I actually don't think it's going to make a lot of difference what they do. So I think they're just going to rotate the seamers quite a lot. Play Bashir, play Leach, depending on the services they get. Rotate through Atkinson, Wokes. Cast is the interesting one because I think Cast is probably ahead of Potts and Stone and Hull, even though he hasn't played a test match. I think because they rate him so highly. He really impressed me in the ODI series. And I think Cast will play at least 2 out of the 3 tests. I think they potentially could rotate Wokes and Atkinson and then rotate through Cast and Potts and Stone for the second seamer position. But I think given as you said, we don't really know what kinds of pitches they'll face, but it's unlikely that they'll just be the roads that they were 2 years ago. And I think England will just back themselves with 4 bowlers. If Stokes can bowl, then great. And
with
try
Root offering a little bit.
With Root offering a little bit and try and go through that.
How do you see it, Phil?
I don't know, really. I'm not just being evasive. What do you think? I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. It's happening so fast.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's happening in less than a week.
I don't think we mentioned this in the pod. So there are a few test players who are playing the ODI series. So Potts, for example, had his luggage and kit for the test series lugged around with him for the entirety of the ODIs because it was straight from Bristol to Pakistan. So the test match literally starts in 6 days' time, which is nuts.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So how do you see it?
The Multan one's quite interesting. So Multan has hosted 1 test match in the last 18 years, and that was England's one in Pakistan in 2022. That was...
And before that was 06, right?
Yeah.
After the Ashes.
Yeah.
The Shoaib Akhtar slow-balled everyone to death.
Yeah, so England have played the last
magical
2
game that was.
Test matches in Multan, I think. So that test match was a bit of a slow burner, not that high scoring. England basically did that thing where they just bowled spin when nothing was happening, and as soon as it reverse swung, they gave the ball to the seamer. So, for example, in one of the innings, Ollie Robinson didn't even open with a new ball. They just gave it to him when it started reversing later on. Probably will play 2 spinners then. If it's at all what we saw in 2022, they'll probably play 2 spinners, Bashir and Leach. The thing with Leach and Bashir, and Butch covered it with Dawson earlier on, you don't get batting from those 2. Those are your 10 and 11, which I think is suboptimal. And then 2 seamers, Atkinson 100%. I think Wokes will probably start the series. I sort of think that if you're showing faith in him in your squad, you almost have to pick him in the 11. He's your incumbent. You'll sort of say you either think he's going to be better at these overseas tours or he's not. And if he's not, you don't pick him at all. And if he's better, pick him in the 11. I think they'll probably start with that.
I mean, I would pick Wokes for sure.
Yeah.
As we've said ad nauseum, he provides the control that the others don't necessarily at this juncture, and he becomes, I think, a very important cog in the wheel.
No, I agree. Where are
sorry, Hull out?
Yeah,
no
Hull's out
replacement.
and no replacement.
Well, that was quite interesting.
Yeah, not hugely surprised, because if they are playing two spinners, you've only got two seamer spots, and they had loads of them, and I thought that Hull was always there as some sort of, this is for development rather than realistic.
Right. Like a bit of work experience.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Fair enough.
Katya, where are Pakistan at as a test side? There's even more doom, gloom, and chaos in their press coverage than usual. But are things as bad as it's perhaps being made out?
I don't think so. The optics are bad, but the optics are usually bad. And obviously, a lot of the press around Pakistan side is incredibly negative right now. But when you actually look at the series results that they've had over the last couple of years, I mean, you pointed out they are actually pretty good. Like, they lost 3-0 to Australia over last winter, having come off the back of a couple of series wins. And, teams go to die in Australia. That's what happens.
They came pretty close to winning one of the tests, and they got an first innings lead in another one.
Yeah. The loss to Bangladesh was bad. Like, the loss that they just went to Bangladesh just happened against Bangladesh was bad. But if you look at that series, Bangladesh have got a very good seam attack, and they played on pitches that were pretty seam friendly. So even when you drill down deep into that, yes, the optics of that were bad, and yes, a lot of what happened in that was bad. But it is explainable as to why they lost to Bangladesh in that way. I think their batting is a little bit suspect. I mean, Shafiq has been out of form for quite a while. Baba hasn't scored a test century for a couple of years. Saim Ayub is opening, and he's incredibly inexperienced. But they are all good players. Like, when you draw down to it, Dilip Shafiq is a very good player. Babar Azam is obviously Babar Azam. Sham Masood is a great player. So they do have the nuts and bolts there. The bowling attack is weird. They have went through the whole thing of dropping but not dropping Shaheen Afridi. Naseem Shah has had a weird couple of months, but it's a Pakistan bowling attack on home soil. You've still got to back them. So I don't think that they're not in a great space, but I don't think they're in the dire place that you would think if you only read about them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Naseem's just not played much Test cricket, but every time I've seen him bowl, I've just thought, especially in the last couple of years, you're going to be amazing. And if he does get a full run on this series, I think he could be breathtaking to watch.
Are both of those bowlers in the squad?
Yeah.
Ahmed Jamal as well. Ahmed Jamal is very good, quick. He's in the squad.
He's one who's played well against Australia.
Yeah, just coming back on the back injury, and he's in the squad, and he's very exciting.
Yeah. So I think, and also, like, England's bowling attack is just completely different to the one that won it for them in 2022. So I think it's I also think that 2022 series is England's best result under McCullum and Stokes. So if England could repeat that, I think that would be a really good sign that they are still making progress, I think. And also, it's worth remembering, in that 2022 series, their bowling attack was particularly weak. They hadn't really... Their seam attack wasn't really much to speak of at all. Naseem, I think, played the first test and then was injured. Shaheen didn't play at all. They hadn't discovered Jamal yet. And there's another guy, Karam Shahzad, who started well but is injured for this series, so he's not involved, but they've found him since then. So yeah, I think Pakistan will be a tougher challenge than they were 2 years ago. Next up, we're going to talk about the end of the county season, Hampshire's Delhi takeover, and two very fun tests in Asia. The county championship is over for another season. There was a lot of rain, so naturally a few underwhelming finishes. Sussex were confirmed as Division 2 champions, with Yorkshire going up with them, while Lancashire will join Kent in Division 2. We talked a lot about Lancashire on last week's show. On Sussex, Katya, you wrote a really interesting piece, sort of getting the inside story of their campaign. After a tough few years, they are back in Division 1. How have they done it?
Yeah, it's been a process, and it all kind of goes back to Paul Farbrace coming in as their head coach 2 years ago, and putting in place this kind of 5-year plan. where they want to challenge for the top half of the Division 1 table. And last year, having in 2022, I think won one match in the County Championship, finished second from bottom in the Div 2 table. In the COVID County Championship, they were bottom of 3 leagues. And then they were not actually that far off promotion last year. And of course, the end of that campaign was kind of marred by their disciplinary issues. They had 3 players banned for the final penultimate game of the season after a really kind of messy innings against Leicestershire, where Jack Carson tried to trip a batter up, and then the disciplinary records racked up. So they had too many players with disciplinaries that they got banned for the penultimate game of the season. And then at the end of last season, John Simpson came in from Middlesex, having played his entire career at Middlesex, came in and captained them, and he's managed to pull together this kind of young side with some really smartly chosen overseas players. And right from the start, they've kind of formed this batting unit on a really good batting track at Hove that scored an incredible amount of runs. I mean, Simpson's 3 runs short of 1,200 runs for the season. And also this incredible bowling attack. They've had Ollie Robinson back available for them for the entirety of the season, and they've not had that for years while he's been bound to England's side. I think it's a bit harsh having Ollie Robinson, who's arguably one of the best bowlers in the world in Division 2. They also had Jaden Seals, who we talked about earlier in the summer with the West Indies, which is an incredible overseas signing. They've got this great relationship with Cheteshwar Pujara. And they've kind of left these really dark times as a club, or hopefully left them behind. They were kind of mired in very public scandal and disquiet in the 2021-2022 years. They had that mass exodus of players, budgets are incredibly tight, and they've managed to kind of overcome all that to get promoted this year and hopefully next year. I don't actually see why there should be a problem with them staying up next year. When you look at the sides in Division 1 and you look at what they've been able to achieve, I think they're in a very good position to
that bowling
stay
attack
up.
is going to win you a lot of games, and they've got a lot of runs there.
They're also hoping that Jofra Archer will be available for them for a couple of championship games early in the season, and Ollie Robinson, Jaden Seals is coming back, Jofra Archer, that's a pretty good bowling attack.
And Phil, Yorkshire are back. They've got a good crop of youngsters. James Wharton this week scored 285 against Northants. Yorkshire scored 726 for 7, declared. A draw was good enough for them to seal promotion, and they more than secured that draw.
Yeah, you could say that.
We watched a bit of Yorkshire early in the season, and I think you made a comment about their young players who haven't had a lot of hype around them, actually all being pretty good. To pick a name out, George Hill averaged 40 with the bat, 23 with the ball.
Good cricketer.
And they're still complemented by senior pros. You talked about Ollie Robinson being back for Sussex. Johnny Bairstow's back for Yorkshire, and he did very well at the end of the season. Adam Lyth with 5 tons, and Ben Code, who we never talk about, but 56 wickets at 15.
I think he finished top.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Of the wicket-taking charts. Yeah. Will Luxton as well as a good young opener. Yorkshire are too big to fail for long. They are back, I suppose, and they'll be watchable next year. Those names that you mentioned are well worth keeping an eye on as well. Finley Bean is another good young opener. He's not going to get you off your seat necessarily, but he's a good red ball opener. They've got some good young talent coming through, and after a horrifying few years, an existentially miserable few years, they will re-emerge. But as one institution shows signs of life, another one shows like they have next to nothing left to offer. And the story of Lancashire this year, which we'll have to dig into, we're going to dig into it in the magazine over the next couple of weeks. The post-mortem has yet to be fully stamped up there, but it's been a horrifying year for them. And I can't remember a club being so restive off the pitch. The disconnect between what looks like a broken and uneven playing staff and the administration as well, led by a CEO who has been calling out agents and reluctant players. And then you have the Lancashire Action Group as well, the supporters club, that are furious with how the club's been run. There is that sense of a kind of vacuum of leadership there as well. And obviously in the shadow of the 100 as well, this is not a happy place at all. They have a coach in Benkenstein who came from out of town, who hasn't done much at all. You wonder how long he'll be in the job. Poor old Keaton Jennings, who's a top man and a top cricketer, has been trying to steer this listing ship, and not even his runs and decency has been able to avoid the iceberg at the end of the year. It's been coming.
It must have been like captaining a club side at times. You've got so many.
When you have a 16-year-old at number 4, you just want to give up, don't you?
Rotating cast of underwhelming overseas Nathan Lyon aside, and just no consistency at all in the batting department. Phil, you asked us to come up with contenders each for the best and worst things in the county championship. I guess coming from a place of love, as 3 people who genuinely love the competition. I guess celebrating the good stuff and also not poking holes necessarily, but wanting it to grow as a competition and improve as a spectacle. Do you want to go first?
I think that point is a good one. The discourse around it is can be dispiriting. This is not this. And while we're going to be interrogating some difficult questions, say in the magazine and on the podcast over the next few weeks, building into next year, it comes from a place of being really proud of this thing and wanting to nurture it and develop it into the next 10 years. So, I mean, there's any number of things that I can list, but for me, what I've enjoyed this year, particularly for me, is seeing young talents come through from nowhere. And now, because of the way that we can access them immediately, it's not word of mouth. It's not waiting for that player to turn up at your club. If you're lucky enough to have a club within your vicinity, you can go and see these players in their prime, or in their full glory, right here and now. You can press a button on a laptop and there it is for you. There were 3 16-year-old debutants this year for the first time since 1949. Did I say that stat the other day on the podcast?
No, but that's a great stat.
So 1949, Fred Titmus and 2 blokes I'd never heard of were 3 16-year-olds, and this year we had 3 more. Rocky Flintoff, obviously, and James Minto, the left-arm seamer at Durham, and Farhan Ahmed as well. Now, each of those 3 stories, for differing reasons, have amazing backstories. And Farhan Ahmed had an incredible debut, as we discussed. 10 for? Yeah. 10 for Notts. 16-year-old Rocky Flintoff we know about. He fell away. You're batting second drop, top division, and you're 16. Doesn't matter if you're Bradman. That's a tough gig. And Minto as well. Like pocket rocket, left arm seamer, and
genuinely quick,
genuinely fast. We saw him live, and he discomforted Rory Burns. Burns, after facing him, came off and was saying to Scott Borthwick, the skipper of Durham, "What the hell have you got there?" Kid's 16, come from nowhere. He's a real kind of uncut diamond from the northeast, and it still gives you that almost like the butterflies in your stomach, they start going when you see young talent coming through. And even though I'm an old man now, nonetheless, it still gets me going. It's really
exciting.
Now.
It's really exciting, I think. And not just a 16-year-old. I think this summer more than most recently, it feels like we've seen the arrivals of lots of really, really exciting
Another 100
players.
for Freddie McCann at Notts last week. Ben McKinney didn't go well in the game at the Oval, but made a really good 100 for Durham, opening the batting. You are right. It's felt like, if you're looking at red ball cricket, it's felt like it's been the year of the rookie, the emerging rookie. And, look, sport's not for you if that doesn't get you going.
Do you want to do your worst thing?
How long we got?
We're aligned on the worst thing. I picked something else out for mine.
I'm going to be really brief, but we could dedicate a whole show to it. And again, it comes from a position of love.
And this is what the Patreon's for.
Right,
we will dedicate whole shows to this.
The bullshit point system where you get 8 points for a draw, I find that bonkers. I find like it's just gone backwards rather than forwards. It used to be 5, now it's 8. So the point system gets on my wick.
So just for reference, Lancashire go down with 3 wins. Warwickshire stay up with 1. Lancashire could have won 4 games and still gone down, and I think that's just wrong.
Yeah, so I think there's too much emphasis on bonus points ahead of the results as well. I could do a whole thing on bonus points, but bloody hell, and for all that red ball cricket is my favourite and the Championship is my longest and dearest love, some of the drift and emptiness of Division 2 cricket is problematic. And look, 2025 is already stuck on, but 2026, it's all up for grabs. And I think it's time, again, from a position of cautious strength, it's time that we discussed what 2026 needs to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we are wedded to the 18, and if crucially, underline this point, if the 18 are wedded to the 18, i.e. if 4-day cricket is continued to be a desired thing for clubs that are in the lower reaches of the second division, then we have to find a way to avoid the horrors of Derbyshire winning one game in 2 years.
Yeah, and
they played 28 games for one win. We have to find a way for that not to happen anymore.
And it's not just Derbyshire. It was probably
Northants finished fourth, and they won 2 games in 14, and they finished fourth.
Yeah, and it was similar last season. Last season, Glamorgan, Derbyshire, and Gloucestershire won one game between them.
Right. So there needs to be it's ripe for an overhaul, but it's not from a position of despair. It's from a position of, now this game is more available than ever before. It's more accessible than ever before. It's actually watched, eyeballs onto the game more than ever before, remarkably. So what do we do to cash in on that? And replenish and revitalise the smaller counties for whom it must be a drudge and a misery?
Katya, what about you?
My best thing first. It could almost be spun as a worse thing, but I love how much of it there is. Because there are so many different plot lines. There's so many different stories that it's almost like flung at you all at once. You're like, oh God, that's happening there. Lancashire's decline, Sussex, after all of what happened going up you always look at it and go, really? Was Sussex there 2 seasons ago? Were they having like rants by ex-players on Twitter and head coaches stepping down, all of that, and now suddenly they're popping champagne corks at Hove. You look at Rocky Flintoff and Archie Vaughan making their debuts this season. You don't need to know much about cricket to recognise those names when they're playing. So you can pick at all these different threads and go, oh, that's cool, that's incredible, that's brilliant. Gloucestershire winning the T20 Blast is ridiculous. I was trying to explain it to someone in footballing terms, and I don't watch football, so I probably got it incredibly wrong, but they're a Saints fan, and I said it's like Southampton being in the top 5 of the Premier League or something. Like, that is ridiculous.
Just on that, it sounds a bit folksy and bullshit, but my wife has next no interest in cricket at all, but I was watching the quarter-final it was. They played Warwickshire, Gloucestershire did, and it was the back end of it, and she was playing nice, so she said, what's going on here? And I explained what was at stake for a club on its uppers, financially struggling, will probably have to move to a place that loses slightly less money than this place does where they're currently at. They've been down in the doldrums for quite a while, didn't win a game last year, and blah, blah, blah. And so the narrative was really strong. And then weirdly, I was covering the finals day, and she happened to turn up late on the Saturday night just as they were winning the game. And she remembered the narrative because it is so persuasive. So I think that's the most heartwarming story of the season, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And that day in particular, that was an absolute. It wasn't a vintage set of games, but as a story, it's as good as it gets.
But you can also, that happens more than you would think without it diluting the amazingness of the story. Like, you think Leicestershire won the One Day Cup last year. Like, Leicestershire haven't won anything in years, and as much as there are problems with the One Day Cup, having groups of young players come in and be able to win those trophies, that is a beautiful thing. And being able to pick at all these different storylines, there is something when you come in that everyone will be able to resonate with and everyone will be able to know. And on top of that, as Phil's kind of already alluded to, it is so accessible, not just in terms of it being online on streams, but you can come and watch a day's play you can come after tea for free, and championship games are not difficult to get into. You think about people who came in and watched that Somerset-Surrey game. As you said, that's one of the best games of cricket you'll ever see, and it's available to be able to watch and go and see. And people who went to that game or were able to watch that game, even if they don't know much about it, will recognise some of the names on that pitch or recognise what was going on that pitch. And that, I think is the best thing about it. So there's so much of it that there is always something there that it's interesting to pick at, is my best thing.
What about the worst thing?
I think the narrative around county cricket annoys me sometimes, in that it's completely legitimate to criticise and want to make it better, but that for me too much stems into moaning about everything that's wrong with it, to the point where it's not actually something that's wrong with it. You look at the One Day Cup final, that was really a really good thing to limit it down to 20 overs before that game started, but there was still people who weren't happy about it. And it's like, well, that's how you want to get a game in. Cricket is so often criticised for being inflexible and not innovative enough. And that is an example of being innovative and being flexible. And it was still being poked holes with. And I find that really grating and really frustrating. We know the schedule is difficult. We know there is no perfect solution for the schedule. There is not going to be a schedule that works for everyone. So completely legitimate to criticise, but don't stem into moaning about it from all quarters, from people on high, from people at the bottom. Everyone is guilty of it. I'm not poking at one particular group or one particular person, but I think a lot of it is too negative.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Just on the One Day Cup, which we didn't really talk about last week very much, there was a lot of negative, toxic noise around the scheduling of it. And for sure, it doesn't have the shimmer of the Lord's finals of the old days. But in terms of the scheduling in the calendar, I had a look at the last two finals that Warwickshire were in. I don't know why I chose Warwickshire, but I remembered that Bell made 100 basically. So I had a look at the last two finals that Warwickshire were in, and they were both pre-100, one 2014, I think, and one a year, I can't remember. And one of the games was played on September the 15th, and one of the games was played on September the 17th. And the final this year was played on September the 22nd. Now, don't get me wrong, by the end of this summer, those days do make a difference. But to think that this showpiece was right in the heart of our summer, and the 100 came and pissed all over it, it's just not borne out by the numbers. There was 5 days difference between when a game was scheduled 10 years ago, a Lord's final 10 years ago, and the Trent Bridge final this time.
So what was it 10 years ago, sorry?
September the 17th.
So I was thinking back to most memorable One Day Cup final I could think of. It was the last time Gloucestershire won something. So the 2015 final, where Sam Curran, genuinely he would have been 17 at the time, nearly won it for Surrey at the end.
David Payne.
David Payne won it for them again. Sorry, I had Jason Roy. They had Jason Roy, Steve Davies, Kumar Sankara, Azam Mahmood, Sam Curran, Tom Curran, Gareth Batty, Jay Dernbach. Gloucestershire won that. That was September the 19th. So barely any change, well before the 100. So yeah, absolutely right. For me, briefly, and they are sort of linked actually. Best, the clips that counties put up of their team singing victory songs in the change room after a game. Durham are probably leaders in the pack of this one. They sing Bladen Races, and they've won quite a lot of games the last few years, so you've seen that a lot. But what I really like about it is when you see like really established international players who played so much Test cricket in the mix, loving it as much as everyone else, like banging their bats down on the floor, that sort of thing. Pajara doing it for Sussex, that sort of thing. And that's linked to what I think is the worst thing about county cricket at the moment,
which is victory songs,
which is the tone around it. And this actually comes quite often from people who love it, and it's not this quaint throwback competition that's you're cosplaying life in the countryside in the 1950s. It's a really good competitive, difficult Red Bull competition. I remember speaking to Kemal Roach exactly this time last year, who said this is as close as it gets to Test cricket. It's really, really good. And I don't think we talk about it being just a really good cricket competition enough. And it goes around the promotion of it as well. It's almost as if it's acceptable for this to not be that good. You talk about the Taunton game, for example, and we talked about it in the pod at the time, but people getting too excited that 20,000 people watching it on a free stream. We've got to aim way, way higher, and the promotion around it.
According to Andy Bull in The Guardian, 750,000
people watched it at some point over the
some
4
point,
days,
yeah.
which is great. Don't
But
get me
that is
wrong.
interesting, though. That is an interestingly big number.
That is an interestingly big number.
And bigger than a lot of eyeballs that would be on a test match behind a paywall on Sky subscriptions.
Yeah. It is. But I still think 20,000 people watching, as I said, one of the best games of cricket, one of the best finishes to a game of cricket, totally free. Anyone in the world could watch it. Shakib's playing, loads of big names playing. You couldn't have asked for more context in the championship table. It's obviously a good number. It's not as good as it should be. And I think we've almost accepted the lack of promotion around it. You know, they don't talk about it on when it's.
We've got plans for that, haven't we?
On Sky during a test match, they don't say, there's this, you'd enjoy watching these guys. Well, they're playing in a county championship game, and you can watch it for free next week. The ECB social media channels, they promote it really well on the county championships channels, but the England channels with millions of people following them, absolutely nothing on the county championship. And I think we're too okay with that, and I think that we should set our standards much higher. This is a really good thing.
The kicker to all of that is that there are a lot of games that aren't as you described. In the lower reaches, we're lucky. We tend to see stuff in the top division here. And go on.
But that's kind of fine. Like, every sport has games that are boring. You know, you look at F1 races are boring most weekends. You know, rugby games are boring. I'm sure there are, not that I watch them, there are boring football matches. You know, that's kind of okay. It's allowed to be boring for a bit. You know, you still have these games like the Somerset Surrey games. Not every game has to be that kind of exciting thing. And cricket should be good enough on its own 2 feet to be able to sustain and pull through those boring games, in my opinion.
Yeah, completely agree.
There are too many teams who are siphoned off from the story of red ball cricket, though. And whether that is a self-fulfilling prophecy within the club themselves, which is a big question. How much do certain clubs, if they were being honest with us, really want to play the number of red ball games that they are playing? That is a big question. But there is no doubt that probably 25% of the whole of the professional playing force in this country are playing red ball cricket either against their will or for minimal, negligible returns. Yeah. And that's an unavoidable fact. And that's not just a few down the pipe somewhere. It's not just a few of the small teams in the lower reaches of some distant division. That's 25% of your game. And so that's why I think we are ripe for the big questions. What does it look like in 2026? Is it promotion and relegation, three leagues of six? Is it a conference style 3 leagues of six? Is it the elimination of bonus points? Is it the reintroduction of different formats? Is it a sort of overhaul of emphasis on the first innings? We have to find a way, if possible, to energize that collective of teams, because otherwise it becomes ever harder to justify at that level. Now, perhaps that's the inevitable end point of this conversation. But as long as there's a chance that it's not, we've got to try and fight to find a way for it to happen.
Yeah. Some newsy bits to finish off the show. So Hampshire have been bought by the GMR Group, who own 50% of the Delhi Capitals. There's a really good explainer piece on ESPN Cricinfo by Matt Roller, who gets into the details of who owns what, who the GMR actually are, and what it means for them down the line, potentially owning the Southern Brave too. I struggle to get enthused by stuff like this, partly because the language around it is just often infused by bullshit. So Rod Bansgrove, the club's majority shareholder, said, "This is a fulfillment of a dream for me, and I hope for all Hampshire cricket supporters." I do understand that there are lots of serious and valid positives to having injections of cash like this in the game. Phil, you found a couple of other comments earlier today that it's hard to take totally seriously.
Yeah, look, I think directing people to Matt Roller's piece on Cricinfo is a good shout and probably more rewarding than listening to us try and summon some kind of insights, because it's certainly out of my purview. I'll tell you that for nothing. Yeah, look, there are lines are always around these kinds of things where people try and sell you sell you the story, convince you that everything's going to be right and rosy. Interestingly, the ECB are full square behind the acquisition, and Richard Gould, who walks the tightrope as CEO of the ECB, tough gig that, walks the tightrope and very, very rarely falls off it. But it's hard not to raise an eyebrow when he talks about, what is it, GMR's respect for the traditions of the game.
Is what he said.
In
Is
this
what he
country.
said, yeah.
And so said they were renowned for it as well.
Yeah, and so you do wonder, really, but you understand why the ECB want it, right?
Yeah.
Because the ECB are still overwhelmingly the organisation that funds the counties, and counties are understandably looking for other revenue streams. Hampshire are £60 million in debt, right? £60 million in debt, and they're owned by a private holdings company. They're one of only 3 counties of the 18 that are owned by individuals. The other clubs are all members owned clubs. There's a reason why this group have gravitated towards Hampshire, because they feel that they can get their hands on the whole of it. At the moment, they just have their hands on half of it, or 1% below half of it.
I think it's simultaneously easy to take the piss out of, but also being quite important. And it's something that we're going to return to quite a lot, because, you've literally got his book there. But when we had Ben Bloom on the podcast early in the season, he talked a lot about this being something that is likely to become more of a reality over the coming years, more private investment. And there's actually quite a lot from Bransgrove he did an interview with The Telegraph about how he thinks this should help shape the future of competitions like the County Championship for the better of the County Championship as well. So something that we'll come back to.
Shall I tell you the one bit of this story that enthused me as someone who grew up as a Hampshire fan? Imagining Kevin Peterson as a mediator in this entire process, which he was. And that is the most brilliant part of the story for me, being able to imagine that, because I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. We had 2 very fun test matches this week. India beat Bangladesh in an extraordinary game in Kanpur. So they won that game despite there only being 35 overs of play in the first 3 days. With Gautam Gambhir at the helm, their new head coach, they're calling it Gamball. India scored 285 from 34 overs.
Brilliant.
In their first innings, responding to Bangladesh's 233. It's the highest run rate in a test innings. It's the fastest a team has got to 50, 100, 200 and 250. That is some win.
So that they batted for 51 and a bit overs
in the entire game.
So sorry if you already said that, I wasn't listening. That's obviously a record, right? By miles, right? For a winning...
It must be, but I don't have confirmation of that at the moment. I have
Put yourself together, mate.
Jasprit Bumrah,
it must be, but comfortably, right?
It must be. It must be. How else did you win a test match like that?
Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. You won a game with barely half a day's batting.
Well, that's Ben Duckett's India.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. I'm sure Rohit Sharma was hat tipping England after the game. Jasprit Bumrah now has 170 wickets at 20.18. That's very good. Jadeja now has 300 test wickets. One of only a handful of players to have 300 test wickets and 3,000 test runs. Ravichandran Ashwin has now been player of the series 11 times in test cricket, drawing level with Matthias Muralitharan's record. Another fun test match, Sri Lanka against New Zealand at Gaul. Sri Lanka absolutely obliterated New Zealand. They scored 602 for 5 declared, then bowled New Zealand out for 88 before enforcing the follow-on and winning by an innings and some. They are 3rd in the World Test Championship standings, and it is not that unfeasible they qualify for the final. If the India-Australia series goes India's way, Sri Lanka could well qualify for that final. And in part, that is thanks to the work of Kamindu Mendis, who we've talked about a lot recently. He hit 182 not out to become the joint 3rd fastest to 1,000 test runs in the game's history, doing so in 13 innings, drawing level with Don Bradman. He's the quickest to do it in 75 years. He looks like he is some player. I am absolutely fascinated by how Sri Lanka will go in South Africa in a couple of months' time. South Africa are playing Bangladesh. They're touring Bangladesh in a series that's coming up very soon. They've rested a lot of their quicks for that series. I hope they are closer to full strength. I'd love to see this Sri Lanka side play against South Africa, a full strength South Africa in South Africa. Because if they get something from that series, they the favourites to qualify for the WTC final, but they will be in a genuinely very strong position.
Well, after Travis Head, obviously, my favourite cricketer is Jaya Surya, the left arm spinner, who bowls like all people should aim to bowl in life, off half a step, left arm round, and was unplayable in that second Test match. I watched quite a lot of it, yes. Because it's on TNT.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
You can watch
I was just
loads of
flicking
it.
through Saturday morning. It was basically the highlights of the first 3 days. By the way, New Zealand were terrible in the field. I don't know if you caught any
I
of
watched
it.
quite a lot of it, yeah.
But they were shocking. And there was, like, Daryl Mitchell's really good fielder. He dropped a couple. They stunk the place out. Nonetheless, Sri Lanka are great to watch. There's a proper team at work there.
Pretty first choice New Zealand side as well. They didn't send a B team. There was Williamson, Latham, Phillips, as you said, Daryl Mitchell,
Conway,
Rachin,
Ravindra.
Conway.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess a couple of other things from that is, talked about it before, that Sri Lanka top 7 is just really good. Like, it's just uncomplicatedly really good. Nissanka, Karunaratne, they tweaked the order a bit this series to make them even stronger, I think. So Chandimal moved up to 3, Matthews at 4, Kamindu at 5, Dhananjaya at 6, and my favourite bit, Kusal Mendis with the gloves at 7. He has played
That's where he needs to bat.
He's basically batted his entire career in the top 4. Clearly not for him. Seeing him coming at number 7 just whacking tired bowling was really, really fun. And with New Zealand, who we will talk about more over the next couple of months, because England play a 3-test series there in December. Tim Southee must be under some pressure as captain. In that specific 11, he's keeping out Matt Henry from the 11. Will O'Rourke, young seamer, started really well in the early days of his Test career. Him and Southee, the only 2 seamers. Southee has not gone well with the ball since becoming captain. And you don't get many seamer captains. He's doing it at 35. He'll be 36 during the England series. How long can he continue? I'm not sure. Anyway, that is everything for today's show. Cheers, Katya. Cheers, Phil. Our preview for the T20 World Cup will be out tomorrow. And also a reminder to join us on Patreon. Remember, 24 extra podcasts in October alone.